As we reported earlier, local civil rights pioneer Marian Spencer died last week at the age of 99. Spencer was the first African-American woman elected to city council. She was also instrumental in the desegregation of Cincinnati schools, Cincinnati housing, and Coney Island Amusement Park. And that's just scratching the surface of the impact she has had on people, places, and leading change in Cincinnati. Cincinnati historian Dan Hurley knew her well. He joins Business Courier editor Rob Dahlmeyer in the studio with some insight and special memories. Dan and Rob.
Thank you very much, Peg. Dan, thanks so much for being here.
Oh, it's great to be back.
We could spend a half hour just ticking off all the accomplishments that Marian Spencer had, but and Peg listed a few of them. But are there any that, for viewers who just don't know very much about her, anything that stands out that you think would be really important for people to know?
Well, I think people always hear about the Coney Island, and they hear the story of her kids who were about 12 and 10, and she called up and said they wanted to come, and they said sure, this event was going to be open to everybody, and she said, well, we're Negroes, and they said, oh, no, and that sparked her efforts. But it all sounds sometimes when it's reported as if she did it by herself, and it was somehow it was easy. It wasn't. This went on for over a decade.
Wow. And
she worked with, because she was connected to everybody in town. She was connected to the NAACP. She had been president of the NAACP. She was on the executive committee. She was on the Women's City Club, which is absolutely important in this community. She was active with HOME, Housing Opportunities Made Equal. She was part of the charter committee. So she had connections to everyone. And this was not just one person out there, but she gathered the community together, and activists came out of the woodwork and worked on Coney Island. And today you would think that Coney Island, an amusement park, we would have a hard time imagining that something like that.
Yeah.
But this was a symbol. And even after the park opened, for another 7 or 8 years, the swimming pool was closed to people. And you got to remember, in places like the public schools, African-American children could only swim on Fridays just before they drained the pools every week, after all the white kids that already had swum during the week. So getting in the swimming pool was seen as verboten.
Right.
And even after working to get that opened, and technically African-Americans could get in the swimming pool, my wife was involved. They would be whites and black high school students who would go together, because there was an effort to try to force the blacks into separate locker rooms.
Wow.
and whites into separate locker rooms. So there was continuing effort to do this. This was not simple. This took a lot of time and involved a lot of people. And Marian was sort of the core that held that whole thing together.
Well, you've known her, you knew her personally for years and years and years. Is there a memory that maybe you think will stick in your head longer than others, though, when you look back on her life?
Well, another thing that Peg mentioned was that she was the first African-American woman on city council. She was elected in 1983. I was working at the polls, outside the polls, passing out literature for Marian and for Bobby Stern in 1985. It poured down rain that day. I had to change clothes 3 times. And all the women lost that day because turnout was so low. Didn't turn out the voters that we needed to turn out. And for me, what was amazing was the way that Marian handled that. Well, not also Bobby handled it,
right,
but Marian handled it because her life was so much more than being a city council person. She just went on and continued to work in the community in all sorts of ways. And some of those were formal, but many of those were informal, being the mentor for a whole generation or two, because she lived so long,
right,
of new people who rose up in the community to take leading roles. And she was the person people could go to and talk with. She always had a smile. She was always pleasant. She was always there with advice, but she had a backbone of steel. It was an amazing person.
And as somebody who didn't know her that well, it was just astonishing to see how late in life her vitality was just still there.
Well, Dot Christensen published a biography of Marian about 5 years ago, and I had Dot and Marian on Newsmakers when we were still doing Newsmakers here, and she was as sharp,
Yeah.
and so she was 94, 95
Right.
at that point.
That's incredible.
It is
Yeah.
incredible.
Well, thanks for being here. Thanks for sharing your memories. And this city truly was blessed to have her. And,
Absolutely.
And thanks again.